Margaret had spent years living in the same home where she had shared countless memories with her late husband, Henry. After his death 5 years ago, the house felt emptier, the walls quieter. Though she had made peace with his passing, there were times when the silence felt overwhelming. The garden, once a shared passion, had become a solitary refuge, where Margaret would spend her afternoons planting flowers and tending to the roses Henry had loved. Despite her outward calm, a deep sense of loneliness had taken root inside her, and she longed for something more than the peaceful routine that now filled her life. Her days consisted of reading novels by the fire, attending community gatherings, and visiting the local bookstore, her favorite spot for some company and conversation. It was on one of these visits that she ran into David, an old acquaintance she hadn't seen in years. They had known each other in their younger days, when their lives were filled with new opportunities and promises. David had been a regular at her book club meetings, and they had shared casual conversations over coffee. He had been married too, but his wife had passed a few years ago, and they had both lost touch in the years that followed. When David first approached Margaret in the bookstore, there was an instant recognition between them, followed by a gentle warmth that seemed to come from the past. They exchanged pleasantries, reminiscing about old friends and shared memories. David had been kind, attentive, and clearly happy to see her again. They decided to meet for coffee the following week, and from that moment on, they began a regular routine of meeting every Thursday afternoon. At first, their meetings were filled with light-hearted conversation about books, life, and their mutual love for simple pleasures. David listened attentively as Margaret spoke about her life after Henry, never interrupting, just offering a comforting presence. As time passed, Margaret realized that these weekly meetups had become the highlight of her week. What started as a simple coffee date began to shift into something deeper, something she hadn't felt in years. One afternoon, after their usual coffee, David invited her to take a walk in the park nearby. It was a quiet, peaceful spot that Margaret had often visited with Henry, and as they strolled beneath the trees, she felt a strange sense of déjà vu. The air was fresh, and the sun was beginning to set, casting a golden hue over the path. They walked in comfortable silence, occasionally speaking about trivial things, but there was a quiet understanding between them. When they reached a bench, David suggested they sit and enjoy the moment. As Margaret sat down, she couldn't help but notice how close they were now, their shoulders just inches apart. She looked at David, and for the first time, she felt a flutter of excitement in her chest. There was a magnetic pull she hadn't anticipated, one that made her heart race in a way she hadn't experienced in years. Margaret shifted slightly, unsure of what to say or do next. It was then that David turned to her, his face serious but gentle. "Margaret," he said, his voice low and steady, "I've really enjoyed our time together. You're a wonderful woman, and I admire the way you've lived your life." His words touched her deeply, but it was the way he looked at her. His eyes filled with something more than friendship that made her pause. Without thinking, Margaret leaned in slightly. David did the same, and before she could second-guess herself, his lips were on hers, soft, warm, and tender. The kiss was gentle but full of meaning, like a promise that had been waiting to be spoken. Margaret's heart skipped a beat as she realized that this simple act had just altered the course of her life. When they pulled away, there was a brief moment of silence. Margaret's mind raced, unsure of what this kiss meant or where it would lead. But as she looked at David, she saw something in his eyes, a vulnerability, a shared understanding that neither of them had been expecting. They sat there for a few moments, neither of them speaking. Margaret's thoughts were a whirlwind of confusion and clarity. She had spent years convinced that her life was complete, that she had lived the most important chapters. But in that instant, she realized that perhaps life was far from over. There was still room for new experiences, new relationships, and most importantly, the possibility of feeling alive again. As they left the park that day, David held her hand briefly, and Margaret could feel the warmth of the connection between them. She wasn't sure what would happen next, but she knew that whatever it was, it would be a new beginning. A beginning filled with the promise of more than just routine, more than just memories. It wasn't just about companionship. It was about rediscovering herself, about stepping outside of the comfortable life she had built and opening up to the unknown. For the first time in years, Margaret felt a sense of hope and excitement about the future. She didn't know where this new chapter would take her, but she was ready to find out.